We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
She was Hitler's medium, right? She was Hitler's personal medium. She was his connection to the spiritual world. Connection to the spiritual world. Connection to the spiritual world.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. Greetings, listeners. In this episode, I have interviewed Vlynn from the Patriot Party Podcast. We discuss a couple of different aspects. We look at the society known as the Vril that came into being and popularity in later years as people start digging into the Nazi agenda. And here in this episode, we discuss that. We talk about who they are, where they're from, and some ideas. And then we also talk about Vlynn. We talk about her past, her ancestry. We talk a little bit about who she is and the family lines that she's from. And then we shift off into her personal experiences that she had with entities, spiritual entities or figures that she experienced to be angels, for example, the Archangel Gabriel. I wanted to talk about a fundamental principle that is crucial to social harmony. Maybe it's part of personal growth, but it's listening. It's a skill in itself of listening to the other person, to letting them talk about their personal experience. It allows them to speak. It allows them to voice and process this reality that they are in. And I think it's important to talk about this because we may fundamentally disagree with their personal experience. And if we fundamentally disagree with their experience, we have the privilege to have our own thoughts, our own ideas, and our own beliefs when it comes to the metaphysical world, the metaphysical universe. But we know that in our diverse world, we're going to encounter people with backgrounds and belief systems and cultures that are honestly foreign to something that we may have heard before. Each person is going to carry a unique set of experiences. How they interacted with the world is going to be unique to them. And they are going to be deeply personal. And typically they form a foundation of the values that they are going to use in their day-to-day living. When we take an individual and we engage with somebody who's going to hold a different belief, a different value, a different idea or perspective, this is the rule that I hold for myself, and that it's essential to remember that their experience are as valid as anything that we have had, and respecting their right to express their experience is a foundational cornerstone that makes Truth and Shadow Podcast not merely an interview show, but a show where I can talk freely about the things that I'm expressing or experiencing. It develops an atmosphere of constructive dialogue, and it's my hope that we'll grow in mutual understanding. When we truly listen, when we allow ourselves to sympathize with the reasons behind someone's beliefs, this is called empathy, and we can develop it in such a way that it not merely acknowledges the other person's right to hold their beliefs, but it allows us to connect on a human level because we're all experiencing this thing called life. And it takes courage. It takes courage to express someone's personal experience. It takes courage to express opinions, especially when many of us are met with what could be called the wall of disagreement. And that means it requires us grace. It requires our maturity and our patience to allow others to speak freely, even if their words challenge our views. In conclusion, respecting the personal experiences of others and allowing them to speak, even when we fundamentally disagree, is not just a moral imperative, it's a practical one. It enhances our social interactions, it fosters mutual respect, and builds a stronger community. And as we navigate the complexities of our world, from a hollow earth or a flat earth or, a ball floating in space, whatever it is, as complex as our world is, let us remember that the truth is often found somewhere in the interplay of light and shadow.
Today we are joined by one of the hosts of the Patriot Party Podcast, a voice of courage, freedom, and unity, the beacon of reason, the pulse of precision, cutting through the nocturnal schemes. Vlynn, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I was taking a look at some of your other shows earlier today, and they're right up my alley. I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Awesome, yeah. I'd been listening to Patriot Party Podcast off and on for the last 3 years. About. Yeah, you guys are one of the ones I found when I was working over in a weld shop because, you got to have something to interrupt the monotony. And it was actually an accident. I had found both of you guys because you were on a podcast talking about something that was tangentially interesting to me, and that was the Vril and the Vrilya as I was studying the Nazi occultism. And you have some interesting stuff to talk about. And since my listeners might not be aware of what the Vril is or the Vrilya are.
Absolutely. So the Vril was actually, the Vril Society was a German society, particularly in Berlin in the 30s and 40s, the 1930s and 40s. And they're often confused with the Thule Society.
Yeah.
Basically, it's the Thule were the bad guys, and they painted the Vril as the bad guys.
Right.
Because that's what they do today too, right? Things don't change. So the Vril Society, how I found it, one of the founders of the Vril Society was a lady named Maria Orsic. And I was just falling down rabbit holes because that's kind of what you do when you start delving into different things. And I came across this picture online. And I am her spitting image. It's crazy. Like, I look exactly like her. And it kind of blew me away. I was like, why is there this picture of me online? So I started delving into who was Maria Orsic and, what was the Vril Society, and finding out, digging into some of my own family history as well. And so the Vril Society tried to, or perhaps did, communicate with a race that they believed lived in the hollow earth called the Vrilya. And the Vrilya was first introduced to the world in a book called The Coming Race in 1892. And it has an anonymous author. It was literally dropped off at a tiny little London publishing company, kind of in the middle of the night. And it got picked up and distributed internationally. Why? No one knows. The premise of the book is there's these two guys go spelunking, cave diving, and there's an earthquake, and they end up falling through a crack in the earth into the hollow earth. And one of the guys dies, and the other one survives, but just barely. And this society of humanoid people that live in the Hollow Earth called the Vrilia nurse him back to health. And they have superior intelligence. They can connect to a force that they call the Vril that enables them to manipulate matter, as it were. The women are stronger than the men. And as far as the women are destructive, where the men are more unifying, I guess is probably the right word. And but the women take a vow never to hurt anyone, especially the men, because it's the only way that they can coexist, right? If one party is significantly stronger and has the ability to kill you on sight, the only way you can coexist with them is to absolutely trust that they won't. So that was the premise of that. And essentially at the end of the book, they tell this guy that eventually they will have to come up from the Hollow Earth, or maybe he tells them they'll have to emerge and reclaim the earth above. So there's a lot of Hollow Earth theories. We've seen Hollow Earth in all kinds of movies, even with the most recent Godzilla, I think, talked a lot about Hollow Earth. It's not really a new thing.
Right.
And, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, all of these stories going back. But this one was particularly interesting. So because it lined right up with the Vril Society. So actually the Vril Society in Germany in the 30s and the 40s, most people think that they were all women, but they were not. In fact, they were paired, but they both men and women. It was half and half exactly. And there was always a pairing of a man and a woman. And they're so close, they're telepathic. But, and I'm talking, this was in real life, not in a book, in real life in the 30s and the 40s. And not a sexual pairing, more of a soulmate, like your twin, like a fraternal twin almost, right? But they let their hair grow long because they understood that your hair is actually an extension of your nervous system and it gives you power. So their hair grew their hair to the floor, both the men and the women. So they were, especially in the 30s and 40s, mistaken as women because their hair was so long. But in fact, it was always a pairing of a man and a woman. So the two leaders of the Vril Society, Maria and Sigrid was a male. Maria was obviously a female. So they were trying to contact the Vril. Whether or not they had success, I don't know. I do know that Maria was one of the most advanced and intelligent engineers of her time. So she actually built the Bell spacecraft. And there's a lot of rumors that at the end of the war, she built a spaceship and she flew away to the Pleiades system, being that they think that's where the Vril originated from, was in the Pleiades system. That's not true. I can tell you 100% that is not true, because I found out what actually happened to Maria, digging into my own family history. So I recalled going back into my own family history. This is all my mother's side. My grandfather is the grandson of the bastard child of King Ludwig and a gypsy. Okay. Now, King Ludwig of Bavaria had a dozen mistresses, and he built them all little mini castles, chalets around Bavaria. And he would travel from chalet to visit each one of his mistresses. And he had a whole number of bastards, right? Whole ton of them. The thing is, the royal families didn't really track bastards. They didn't really care. As far as the men go, they spread their seed far and wide and had a blast. But by the time he got married, King Ludwig, he had contracted syphilis from who knows. And so he did not have any legitimate children, and he died shortly after his wedding. He did build Neuschwanstein Castle. He founded the Bavarian Illuminati. He was generally not necessarily the best guy. So, but an amazing engineer. So my family was one of his acknowledged bastards. And we inherited the castle, the chalet, still in our family. So when I was a child, my mother actually got transferred over to Europe, and we lived in London for a year. And so we took the opportunity to go visit our family in Germany, who she was close to. My grandmother had been born in Germany and came over here right after the war, or during the war. I'll get into that. It's kind of important, actually. And it's, we go down the line. So we went to Germany and we went to visit the castle. And I would beg my aunt and uncle to bring me over to the castle because I loved it. Like, I would explore that place from top to bottom. I found so many little like nooks and crannies and crazy passageways and, all kinds of like hidden treasures. But the library was my favorite. There was this little library kind of tucked away in a corner. And there was a bunch of libraries, but this one just called to me. And I found a book in there. And I was 9.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was 9. And I found a book in there. And it was a journal, like a leather-bound journal, handwritten. And in German, which I spoke some German just being around my family, but I couldn't read German, couldn't write German. So I asked my mom to get me a German-English dictionary so that I could translate this journal because I was just fascinated by it. And I don't know what it was. It just like, I felt like I had to read it. I was 9. So I literally translated this whole journal, went through it. Now 30 something years later, I've come to understand that it was actually Maria's journal. But I read the whole thing and it told her story. And I had no idea who she was, but it was, she came from the Orsic family in the late 20s, and came to Germany with her fiance. And she went to Berlin and she kind of got caught up in this political movement. And she was called, she believed, by God to follow this path and try and find the Vrilia. Like, she believed it was real. Mm-hmm. But she was also an engineer. And like I said, she built the Bellcraft. She built the first anti-gravity engine, which works, by the way. I think a lot of the UFOs that they see right now are actually German ships. Because if you go on the Ingersoll Lockwood website, you can see the plans, or at one point you could see the plans for the Bellcraft. We covered it on one of our Tru-spiracy shows a while back. And it's the same plans that I saw scribbled in her journal when I was a kid. I mean, exactly the same. And I had no idea what they were at that time because I was 9. But I have almost perfect recall. I remember everything I've read, almost everything I've heard. I file it away in my brain and I can bring it back whenever I want. Sometimes some things take me longer, but this was so impactful. This particular journal, like, it called to me so much. It was so impactful. I've never forgotten it. So fast forward, then I come across this picture of her. And again, it looks just like me. I mean, spitting image. So I go to my mom. Shortly thereafter, we went on vacation in Jamaica, and I got my mom really drunk because that's what you do on vacation in Jamaica. And we're sitting up on the sun deck, and she's a little tipsy, and I pull up this picture on my phone, and I'm like, Mom, who is this? And she goes, oh, that's my grandma. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? She goes, oh, yeah, that's my grandma. That's your grandmother's mother. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's wild. She said, I never met her. She died before I was born. But that's 100% your grandma. And I was like, okay, well, how did that happen? Because as far as anyone knew, Maria Orsic never had any children. And what the hell? I have my grandparents' confirmation paintings. I mean, they're these ornate, I can't even describe them, certificates. It's not like what you get today in church. Like, I mean, there's like a whole big painting and it's all, ornate and calligraphy and whatnot. And the name of my grandmother's is not Orsic. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's Witzelbach. And I said, Witzelbach. And I looked up Witzelbach. Well, that's actually a royalty as well. It's like, okay. German royalty. So I started digging and come to find out that Maria did actually have a baby, obviously, and she gave her up for adoption, sort of. Like she gave her to a family, her cousins, to raise in Bavaria, in Garmisch. And my grandmother didn't know that they weren't her parents. And Maria would come visit her all the time when she was little. And she thought she was, a cousin kind of a thing. And then came the war, came the Anschluss. And Maria, being in the situation that she was she was Hitler's medium. Right? She was Hitler's personal medium. She was his connection to the spiritual world. She was trying to control him, and she was obviously very unsuccessful. But when she got pregnant, I guess she was scared that her baby would be used against her. And this is what I remember from the story from the journal. And so she gave the baby to her cousins to raise. But when the Anschluss came, or when she started hearing rumors of the Anschluss, now here's the thing about World War II that most people don't know. Hitler's primary focus was not originally to go after the Jews. Hitler actually was going after the bastard royals because Hitler's also a Rothschild. So at the behest of his family ties, because the Rothschilds were trying to get rid of most of the royalty. If they could not breed them out, which they couldn't with the bastards, then they were going to just straight up kill them. So the initial focus of World War II and the genocide and the concentration camps and all that was to get rid of the royals, the bastard royals, who were spread all over. Some kind of prophecy about how one of the royals, one of the bastards would bear the son who would rule the world with an iron fist and a velvet glove. And they didn't want that. So they were trying to get rid of him. Well, Maria had some other good friends in Vienna, and she warned them to get out. Well, that was my grandfather's family. So because they're all cousins. Orsic in Hungary, where Maria is from, Orsic was a derivation of Orsini. Essentially, just like when people come here and they Americanize their names, they do the same thing in Europe when you go from family, country to country, especially when your last name is Orsini, which is one of the most hated names in Europe.
Yeah.
Part of that family fled to Hungary and they changed their name to Orsic. Pretty much, it's the same family. But they still had, relations all over. So I'm still trying to find out what my grandfather's real name is, or was. I know it's not the name that my mother carries, because he took Maria's word and he fled from Austria, and he took six of his sisters with him. His parents stayed behind. And two of his sisters, they were obviously quite prolific German Catholic, Austrian Catholics. But two of his sisters stayed behind with their husbands because they did not want to leave. And his parents stayed behind because one was a world famous cook and the other was a world famous baker. His father was the baker and his mother was the cook. And they stayed behind. And then they initially stayed behind when my grandfather left, and he came to the States with six of his sisters. And he joined the American Army. Turns out he actually joined the OSS. And because he obviously was fluent and was able to speak English without an accent, he could speak German and, Bavarian dialects and Austrian and he spoke Polish, and he spoke like 7 or 8 different languages. So they snatched him right up. The only problem was that he was short. He was under 6 feet. So that was why he went to the OSS, because he wanted to go to another kind of unit, but you had to be over 6 feet. And he was very mad about that because he was only 5'10", and he couldn't get that extra. Like he could maybe push it to 5'11", but he could not pass at 6 foot. So he went to the OSS, which we did not find out for the longest time. In fact, he told my husband, because they're very close. He and Mick were very close before he died. But so he went back and he got his parents out initially. Just after the Anschluss, he managed to get his parents out, and they all lived in New York, his whole family, except for the 2 sisters that stayed behind in Austria. But they that initially they didn't believe what was coming. And, they thought that Maria was fear mongering.
Right.
Right. And then it happened. They thought they would be protected. They thought their name would protect them. They thought their blood would protect them. They thought that nothing would come after them. And then all of a sudden, they weren't protected. So they were lucky that my grandfather took the initial word and got out, and he came back for them and he got them out. They were his parents, of course. But he had also made a promise to Maria that he would try and get her out. So the story that we were told growing up about how he met my grandmother was that in the middle of the war, he went on vacation to Germany, and he went to a ski resort, and my grandmother was a hairdresser there, and he fell in love with her instantly, and he convinced her to marry him, and he sent her back to the States, and he came home 6 months later, and she was pregnant with their first child, 6 months pregnant with their first child. And everyone just accepted that blithely. And I was like, Grandpa, how did you go on vacation in Germany in the middle of the war when it was Germany and we were fighting against Germany and you were in the American army? That doesn't make any sense. And he said, don't ask us questions you're not ready for the answer to.
Okay.
Of course, that was when I was like 10, because I always saw the obvious. I always asked questions, and I never could understand how other people just accepted things that were just so blatantly untrue. Like, can you not see that? Anyway, so I pestered my grandfather over the years, and he finally ended up telling me on his deathbed, which was shortly after I got married, so almost 20 years ago. He told me that the woman that warned them to get out of Austria in the first place had a daughter, but she didn't even know that she was Maria's daughter. She thought she was her niece or whatever. And this daughter worked up at this place. That part was true, at a ski resort on the Zugspitze, doing hair as a hairdresser. That part was true too. So he told the OSS that, because initially when you join the OSS, because if you're a foreign national, and becoming a US citizen, and you were joining the OSS, they asked you if you had any family in Europe that you wanted to get out. Well, He told them about his parents, obviously, but he also told them about his wife. Now, he was not married, and he had never met this woman, my grandmother, but he told them that he had a wife because he was absolutely determined that he was going to keep his promise to Maria and try and get her daughter out of Germany. So he told the OSS that he was married. And so they dropped him into Germany, and he climbed the Zugspitze and went to this resort, and Maria met him there. She basically dipped out. So the story of her going into the mountains and getting into an imaginary spaceship and flying away, that didn't happen. But she did go into the mountains. And the only reason that my grandmother was convinced to leave with my grandfather was because Maria, who she thought was her aunt, was there. And the whole thing came out. Maria was actually her mother, not her aunt, and that she had to get out because she was in danger. Maria was in danger. Hitler had essentially turned against her. And he got them both back to the States. Well, Maria didn't stay in New York for very long. It was very crowded. And she actually went to Tennessee, and she founded the Vril Society in Tennessee. Did you know that to this day, there is an American Vril Society in Tennessee? Yeah. And there are very few very old members of the Vril Society who were children of the original Vril, and they're here. So right. It is still an active society. I was invited to be a part of it. I did decline because you have no secrets from them, and I am a keeper of many secrets that are not mine, and I do not feel comfortable disclosing. So, but I have a little more entryway there than anyone else does, and probably know a little bit more about them than most anyone else does. So anyway, I've been talking for a very long time. Do you have any questions?
No, all of that's very fascinating. I enjoy trips down ancestral lanes, if you will. The stuff that really stands out to me the most has always been the idea that there are people who receive inspired messages from some other place, be them other intelligences of any kind, and the ability to construct or reconstruct technologies that are given to them from any form of intelligence, be them sinister forces or other, ideas of hollow earth entities living inside of a space, like, the center of the earth kind of thing, being able to transmit via, telepathic abilities, ESP abilities to people's always been a real interesting deep dive rabbit hole trail, if you will. But what's really fascinating is people who usually have histories like this are typically touched by forces that many normals don't ever experience. I mean, a lot of us go our day-to-day lives with little to no awareness of a guardian angel, or angels in the case of some people. And, we don't really seem to hear from God or from any kind of heavenly host, but we do know there's a lot out there that do have and have received messages from angels, and you're one of them. You and your husband both have received messages from angels, and that's a real interesting aspect to take the conversation, because there have been people who clearly have heard from the Holy Spirit or an angel spirit, if you will. Could you talk a little bit about some of your angelic experiences so that...
Yes. Well, the first one, I'll tell you what, first off, now I have detailed all of this on my Substack called Archangels Among Us. It's archangelsamongus.substack.com. So go check that out. And I write out the whole first story there. The first time that I met Gabriel, and I didn't even know he was Gabriel at the time. It was actually at my friend's wedding in Pennsylvania. And come to find out it's because my house was protected. So initially he couldn't contact me at my house.
Well, we understand that the heavenly host, they do not violate human free will. And if we set up some kind of protection, they will not try to interfere with that in any way. I mean, demons will send people to really mess with your stuff.
So there are 7 archangels. All right. Now there's many, many levels of angels, but the 7 archangels have the ability to interact more directly with humans. Those 7 archangels, and they've been given slightly different names over time. But of course, Gabriel, the messenger, Michael, the warrior, who brings death and destruction, Samael. I'm not quite sure what Samael's role is. And he's not the devil, as a lot of people are like, oh, Samael is Satan. No, he's not. He's not Lucifer. Joel, who is the archangel of humor, Uriel, who is the archangel of time force, and Zechariah, who is the archangel of death. So we were on our way home from a friend's house, just Mick and I in the car, and I was driving. And when we were about halfway home, or not even, almost like 5 minutes from home, he looked over at me and started talking to me. And I was like, not now, because the kids were in the car. And I actually put on the Struggle Jennings song, God, We Need You Now, and blasted it, sung at the top of my lungs to keep him quiet until we got home. And I sent the kids in. And I went around to open his door because he didn't seem like he was moving, and he couldn't move. And I was like, okay. So I closed his door again, and I took my phone out and I hit the voice record button. And I got back in the car and I set the phone down on the center console so they couldn't see the screen, but it was recording. So he didn't know that I was recording this until much later. For the longest time after I recorded this, I tried to play it for Mick, and he couldn't hear it all. He would hear it static, which is wild as well. I had to play it through like a third, play it on another show and then have him listen to it that way, and that was the only way he could hear it. Crazy. At first, I was in complete disbelief. Thought Mick had been MK Ultra, thought it was, that the government, because they've messed with his brain, he's had brain surgery, all kinds of stuff. Come to find out that actually people that have had traumatic brain injuries, it is a marker in the blood, but people that have had traumatic brain injuries are more receptive to hearing things. But then it was Mick's turn. And for 40 days and 40 nights, Gabriel did not leave him alone. One time, and he was a firefighter at the time. One time, his lieutenant called me, and he was like, what is going on with Mick? I was like, what are you talking about? Because I couldn't tell him, And he was like, last night at 2:00 in the morning, I caught him wandering through the bay in his skivvies. And I was like, I mean, okay, people sleepwalk, not a big deal. And he was like, but he was speaking in a language that I have never heard before. And I was like, Zig, Mick speaks like 7 different languages. And he was like, I know. This is a language I don't think anyone has ever heard before. And I was like, well, he was dreaming. Who knows? Like, I totally played it off. But I believe he was probably speaking in the angelic tongue. It ramped up from there. But there's a couple of things, and I wrote all this in my Substack. Once he told me that are some people who are chosen to protect a specific bloodline to ensure its continuation across time. Then one day we were sitting on the back porch, and he asked me, or he told me a story. He said, what do you know about St. Thomas? I said, very little besides the name. And there's more than one, so I didn't even know which one he was referring to. He said, St. Thomas lived in the time of Jesus and right after Jesus. So he was a saint before they were saints, I responded. Because early saints weren't canonized by the church, and there wasn't a church, not like we have now. He said, exactly. He said, Thomas doubted everything. He doubted God. He doubted Jesus. He doubted the resurrection. So Thomas went out into the desert, and Jesus appeared to him there. Thomas doubted he was real. And he asked him, are you really Jesus? And Jesus said, touch the wounds on my hands if you don't believe. And Thomas touched his hands, but he still doubted. So Jesus told him, touch the nails in my heels if you don't believe. And Thomas touched them, but he still doubted. So Jesus told him, touch the wound in my chest if you still don't believe. And Thomas touched his chest and felt his heart beating, and he was shocked. How can this be? He asked Jesus. And Jesus said, Thomas, you still doubt? And I said to Gabriel, I'm no saint. I just need to know why. But I've stopped questioning. So what's to come? Well, here's a prayer that Gabriel wrote on our computer. And when I vest my flashing sword and my hand takes hold in judgment, I will take vengeance upon mine enemies, and I will repay those who haze me. O Lord, raise me to thy right hand and count me among thy saints. Whosoever sheds man's last blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. Destroy that which is evil, so that good may flourish. And I shall count thee among my favored sheep, and you shall have the protection of all the angels in heaven. Never shall innocent blood be shed, yet the blood of the wicked shall flow like a river. The 3 shall spread their blackened wings and be the vengeful striking hammer of God. Do you know who the 3 are? That would be Gabriel, Michael, and Uriel. Those 3 shall spread their blackened wings and be the vengeful striking hammer of God. They're still mad about Jesus. Seriously, they wanted to come and smite everybody after we killed God's only son. Really, we murdered him. Humanity murdered him. And they were pissed because they didn't see the bigger plan. They can't see the future the way that God can. They're not omniscient. But they do have emotions as much as they like to claim that they don't. They do still understand a little bit of what emotion is, I should say. And I tell people this all the time, especially I do a show every morning called The Good Book at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday and 9 a.m. on Saturdays. And I'll probably start doing it Sunday as well. One day I just started doing The Good Book, and because it came to me that the last time I really read the Bible was in college in a comparative religions class. And that was a long time ago.
No, it wasn't. Come on.
I mean, I'm 45. Yeah, right. It was a long time ago. Right. So I was like, okay, and I didn't pay that close of attention then, to be honest. I had bounced from church to church my entire life, looking for some place that I felt like I fit. I never found one. So I kind of got, because every church I found, it was some old guy telling me what I should believe about what the Bible said instead of just letting me read it for myself. But I never read it for myself. And I needed to correct that. So I decided to start the good book, where I sit down. Initially, it was 30 minutes. It became an hour very, very quickly, where I sit down and read the Bible. So I just finished the second book of Kings today. We're going through it at quite a good clip. But I was on my Rumble feed looking for something, and something popped up on my feed. On my homepage, somebody that had 2 subscribers, and I was not one of them. Like, there was no reason for this to be on my homepage, right? Like, wasn't something my homepage is filled with people that I subscribe to. That's generally it. And it had the Lion of Judah, the lion that's our logo for the Patriot Party podcast, but this is an actual lion. I was having doubts, right? Every once in a while, those doubts start to creep in. You think, am I crazy? Like, what? Seriously? Like, how can this possibly be real? And every time I start to have a doubt, God sends me a sign. Every single time, God sends me a sign. You just have to know where to look for it, because it's not a voice in your head. If we have been trained now, if you hear a voice in your head, you think you're crazy. And they give you drugs, and you go to your psychiatrist, and they tell you that your parents are mean to you, and you're paying to have a friend who doesn't even know you. Get a good friend who knows you, and then you won't need therapy. But I tell people all the time, it's not a voice in your head. That's not how God talks to you. If you have a question, you ask that question, and then a song comes on the radio that seems to answer your question, or a commercial comes on TV, and something in a line that they say, something in your environment answers your question. That's your sign. That's your answer. You just have to have ears to hear. You have to have eyes to see. Listen to God. Put God first in your life. If you feel like you have a greater purpose, if you feel like you've been chosen, if you feel like you've never really fit in, if you feel like you're being called, it's because you are. Put God first in your life. Find your path. Listen to him with ears to hear. Look for the signs with eyes to see. Have faith. Listen. And your whole life will change. And it will probably lead to an entire life change. You may sell your house and move. Maybe get chickens, which is getting chickens leads to becoming a conspiracy theorist. I will warn you right now. That is the gateway drug to conspiracy theories is chickens. Chickens. They're little dinosaurs. They're feathered dinosaurs.
Velociraptors.
Totally. Oh my God. I have a frizzle. I have a half silky, half big rooster. Mm-hmm. He's this little pint-sized, half feathered, half furred thing. He is the fuggliest, most adorable thing you've ever seen. And he's the biggest attitude. Bully.
Yes.
Oh my God. I have 4 other roosters, and they're like 3 times his size, and he chases them around and bullies them constantly. It's hysterical. And he sounds just like a velociraptor. I'm like, they totally used that chicken sound is what they used in the movies.
So as we begin to wrap up, Vlynn, let me have you tell people where they can obviously find, obviously the Patriot Party podcast, and you're mostly on Rumble because you guys are not doing the Facebook and stuff like that.
No, I am. We are now broadcasting on X as well.
Okay.
So, on mine, although there's a Patriot Party Pod account on X, I use mine because mine's verified, and I help, use my business for that too. So my account on X is at VLynnQ. Not because of Q, but because my name actually starts with Q.
Right.
So anyway, at VLynnQ on X, or at the Patriot Party Podcast on Rumble, on pilled.net, on Clout Hub, although they've been going through some back of the house changes, so I don't think they're running lives right now. And sometimes on the Red Pill Project. So that's always fun. So I do the Good Book every morning at 8 a.m. And then I've actually started broadcasting our friend Leanna Wilbert's show all day, from right after the Good Book from 9:05 until about 4 o'clock. And And then we come on at 5:45 for the pre-show for the Patriot Party Podcast, which is 15 minutes of music. And then 6 p.m. is the start of the show. We go until about 8:15, Monday through Thursday. Friday, we do a longer show. We go till about 9:15. And then on Saturday, I do Freedom Gardens at 2 p.m. My best friend Heather and I do that together because I'm trying to teach people how to grow their own food. Again, chickens leads to conspiracy theories, and you start wondering why your eggs taste so much better. And you then understand that the eggs coming out of the grocery store are so processed and they're 100 days old. Oh my God. And then you're like, wow. And then you fall into the whole natural food thing. So we started doing that. Then I discovered electroculture, which grows your food twice as fast and up to 5 times bigger. That's a whole nother show. It's Antiquitech, going back thousands of years. It's amazing. And so then I launched a business, electrofreedom.com, where I sell electroculture antennas, all handmade, handcrafted from all organic wood. Anyway, so that's electrofreedom.com. And you can find all of our links at patriotpartypod.com. Now, I will tell you, both those websites are hosted by Epic, and big tech does not like Epic because it is a true free speech patriot platform. So it'll pop you up with this, thing saying, oh, this might be spam or phishing or whatever it is. It's not. It's just that they don't like Epic because...
Yeah, that means if you're using Chrome, you're going to probably get flagged that it's not an okay site.
Yes, exactly. So patriotpartypod.com, electrofreedom.com. And then, of course, the Substack, Archangels Among Us.substack.com. I'm trying to catch up on the prophecies and try to put a couple of those out every single day. There's a lot. And
wonderful. Yeah. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.